Okay, so one question is how to approach investors. Again, that's a big question, and it may deserve a whole program by itself, but just a couple of ideas. There's an expression in negotiations that if you wait till you're at the negotiating table, you're already too late. You've already lost a lot of leverage. You have to realize that you're always negotiating, and you don't want to run a business sequentially where you do the formation, and then you raise the capital, and then you get your patents, and then you hire your people, and then you do some research. Some of these things you have to do at the same time. So one idea is when you're looking for legal counsel, one question to ask is, can this law firm help me with introductions to investors that invest in my industry? And maybe it's worth paying a little bit more money to a big city law firm that is connected to venture capitalists, to angel groups, to accelerators, to private equity, what have you. If they can make introductions, that's very, very valuable. Another thing you can do, you can look and see who's forward citing your patents. So if your company has patents and you're receiving citations from others, when others file their patents, they're referring to your patents. Well, if that's from a big industry player, you may want to contact that industry player and say, hey, I know that you know my work because you're citing my patents and you probably respect the work that I'm doing, and maybe we should talk about a strategic alliance. If you're looking for sort of corporate money, sometimes it helps if you can contact fellow researchers that you already know that are working for these big companies and tell them what you're doing and try to get them excited about what it is you're doing and have them put pressure internally on their business development people and have them, induce them to cause their business development people to reach out to you to make some introductions and to get discussions going. Anyway, those are a couple of quick ideas. I can share some of these reports with you if you're interested. So I know we didn't have time to go into every slide in a huge amount of detail. But that brings us up just to about 10 o'clock. So I think I will stop speaking. So I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to go to our next session. Our next session is a panel discussion on the longevity industry. And so, Mark, if we can get our speakers ready, that would be great. I see some of them here. But let me just do a quick introduction of the gentlemen that are going to speak to us about longevity sciences in general. So we have Steve Guerin, who is the Director of Bioinformatics at the Center for Research and Education on Aging and serves on its advisory board. He is also a researcher at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. While at the University of California, Berkeley, he played a major role in the invention and development of the automated imaging microscope system. We are very pleased to have Brian Wang, who's a noted futurist thought leader. He's a popular science blogger and YouTuber with 1 million views per month. His site is nextbigfuture.com. Should have Dr. Nuno Martins, who's a visiting scholar at the University of California, Berkeley, in their Center for Science, Technology, Medicine, and Society. As a scientist and an innovator, Dr. Martins is currently focused on new technologies aiming to increase healthy human lifespan. Dr. Martin's scientific work has involved collaborations with UC San Diego, University of Miami, Duke University, Moscow State Medical University, Purdue University, and Monash University, among others. And our fourth gentleman to speak to us on this session, Paul Spiegel. Paul Spiegel, among other things, is the founder and CEO of Libertas Biomedical. Libertas Biomedical is pursuing international alternatives for the research and administration longevity-related treatment, particularly related to the treatment of aging diseases. So, gentlemen, a pleasure to have you with us. So, Mark, if you could make sure all of them are unmuted. So Brian, I think you Paul's in that, and Steve. Steve, if you want to turn on your camera and unmute yourself, that would be great. So I'll just open it up and get into a lot of discussions. Maybe our four panelists can raise their hands so we can avoid some of the crosstalk. But first question is, where does the line of demarcation lie between traditional pharmaceutical companies and longevity companies? You know, as a layman, I think of a company that's in the pharmaceutical space seeking a cure for cancer or heart disease. You know, if they're successful, they're going to increase longevity. So that's a longevity company. So, Brian, would you like to start off?
Yeah. So I think one, if you do the
can't
Venn
hear
diagram,
Brian.
can't hear me. Might someone else go then? Can you hear me now, or is there a problem, Phil? Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3. Hello.
Yep, we can.
Okay. So I think it's a little Venn diagram thing here. You know, biotech companies include longevity companies. Include longevity companies. Longevity companies are also anti-aging companies. So I think there's kind of an overlap among all those things. The way I demarcate them is that I view anti-aging companies as ones that are working on fixing aging damage as a vector towards treating disease. So like fixing number of cells, you know, the 7 kinds of damage defined by Aubrey de Grey, and the Senescence Foundation. And then, but if you were to look at it in terms of like, if you get further down the road where you actually get results, and you can say, okay, if we can exceed what people expect, which might be life expectancy beyond 100, and then getting maximum life beyond 122, the current record, then you could say, okay, now you're getting into air quotes real anti-aging. So that would be kind of some definitions.
Okay, great, thank you. Paul, I think you wanted to say something?
Well, yes, thank you, Brian. It's an excellent description. I think we have to go back farther. Once you accept that aging is a disease, and once you accept that aging can be addressed through both the ordinary and the novel methods of treating any disease, then the demarcation between classic pharma and longevity tech becomes very small. I mean, we're working on the same things. Classic pharma may be working on, you know, liver disease, they may be working on emphysema, they may be working on Alzheimer's, but that's because these things are understood to be a disease and therefore worth addressing in the medical context. A lot of people still don't think that longevity research is. There's this idea that it's natural. Well, I mean, yes, malaria is natural too, but we're working on it. Once you see aging as a disease, the demarcation from a pharmaceutical or from a therapeutic standpoint of any sort becomes very, very small. It's just another subset of the general fight against disease.
Yeah, I think another problem with this, as far as pharma is concerned, is that aging is still very much a moving target. If you look at the companies involved in the aging space, there's a very wide range of approaches. And I think that's very confusing for people in decision-making positions at these large pharma companies. They really don't know where to start. So I think what they're still waiting for is for there to be more of a consensus as to how to deal with the with this issue of aging. Where's the clock that is determining the aging process? How to slow it down? So I think a lot of those issues are still unclear as far as these people are concerned. So I think that's another kind of a barrier to this problem.
Okay, would you like to take now? This?
Yeah, great reply. Yeah, great replies from Brian, Paul, and Steve. And I would add that some of these companies are indeed, in some of their pharmaceuticals, are indeed or have some kind of intervention that extends life. And there's a big business opportunity right now, which is exploring how we can convert some of these drugs more to a setting of a preventive, longevity-based, healthy-based medicine. So it's really a trend and a big business opportunity. I think your question reports to the opportunity that is available right now, which is convert some of these drugs and use them for a more longevity-based therapy for patients.
Yes.
Paul?
Yes, no, that's a great thought. I just learned last week at a conference in Copenhagen that a company called BioAge, which, full disclosure, is a client of mine, BioAge out of Richmond, California, has recently had a large investment from Eli Lilly. I believe it's either 130 million or 170 million, one or the other. I confuse two companies all the time in that regard. But it's a lot of money. And they have just, like in the last week or two, announced that they are going to go IPO. They have not completed it yet, as far as I know, but that is their intention. Now, this is a classic example of an aging company, and BioAge is very much an aging company. I met the founders a dozen years ago in Cambridge when they were young and idealistic, and now they're older and they're going great guns, and they're going to go public. Unity Biotech has also gone public. This is not, the differences are not as big as you might think.
Okay. Is longevity solely focused on extending years of life or also quality of years of life?
I can answer that in one quick sentence. Nobody, absolutely nobody wants an extra 30 years of decrepitude.
Yeah, there's actually a term, David, called health span. Obviously, I think when it comes to aging, everybody wants to increase lifespan, but I think the word health is neglected from that. From that, in other words, what we all want to do is live longer, healthier lives, not longer decrepit lives, like Paul said.
Okay. So, how do you measure the quality of years of life, and who should do that? And I guess there could be a lot of ethical questions with that. Nuno, would you like to say something?
Sure. And reiterating on what Paul and Steve so well explained, longevity has always been about healthy longevity and has always been about extending our healthy life. Some people misunderstood the concept of longevity, but it means by the base definition as a healthy longevity and extending our healthy years of life. And what was the second one? Sorry, you said on
who should determine, or how do you determine what a quality of year of life is?
Yeah, the patient himself. Everybody knows what health means, right? When you're vibrant and you're energetic and you love life, you're healthy, right? Your mental well-being is connected to your physical well-being and you're enjoying life, right? So it's really about searching for the optimum quality of life, right? It's the same metric we use in medicine. How do you measure a patient right now as being healthy in conventional medicine? You look into the patient and ask him, how do you feel, right? That's the basic metric for it, right? Same thing here, right? If you're 80, but you feel 40 and you're energetic, you want to explore life, you want to live, you want to have a relationship, you want to do a new career, then somehow you're healthy, right?
Yeah, and I also want to add to that, my mother's 87 years old and she lives by herself. She drives her car. In fact, I took her on a European tour about a year and a half ago, by the way, culminating in Cairo, Egypt. So we actually flew from Athens to Cairo. We went to the pyramids and everything. And she doesn't require a cane or anything like that. She was all mobile and had a wonderful time. So that, I think that pretty much demonstrates healthy aging right there.
Yeah,
Okay,
Steve's
Brian,
mother is actually
let's
wonderful.
give Brian a chance. Let's give Brian a chance. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Brian.
so there's a lot of people and groups who are working on very detailed physical performance metrics, basically like physical tests, how far you can walk, exercise, muscle mass, and then they also include test measurements. So they're getting very detailed into trying to quantitatively measure various physical health performance levels. And you see that with I think Brian Johnson, the rich person who's doing some kind of like aging reversal Olympiad, where they score people based on various kinds of performance and stuff. So there's, if you want to dive deeply, you can do very, very detailed tests of like, what's my physical performance at different levels of age, and then trying to convert that into aging scores. And they also have biomarkers working. So there's work to make this a very detailed, formalized, quantitative, data-based approach to determining how healthy, what's your physical performance levels, intellectual performance levels, cognitive performance levels, all the way through.
Paul, did you want to say something?
Yeah, first off, I want to shout out Steve's mother. She's incredible. She really is. And, you know, the context of healthy aging is very much an individual question, as Nuno said. My grandmother died at 100, and she was just happy as hell until she turned about 97 or 98. Well, the first thing that happened was that both of her boyfriends died. So that was really unfortunate. She had two boyfriends when she was in her 90s. But what really got her, what made her decide she was done with it all, was creeping incontinence. She couldn't stand that. It felt like it was an imposition on her freedom, on her autonomy. And once that happened, she'd already set her sights on 100, said, I'm going to live to be 100, and that's it. I'm done. I don't like my life anymore. So her quality of life was impaired, and that made the decision for her. We held a big 100th birthday party for her. She was the queen of the day, and within 6 weeks, she started to decline. And within 3 months, she was dead. That was her choice.
So yeah, but I do want to just do a little segue of what Paul said very briefly, and then we're fortunate in that the brain tends to outlast the body. And in many cases, I mean, obviously we've heard of Alzheimer's and dementia, but in the case of like my mother and Paul's mother, clearly, you know, these ladies are, you know, were very cognitively functional, and unfortunately, what happens is the body deteriorates right under them. So that's certainly a problem, and certainly a challenge for aging researchers such as myself and others is to alleviate that problem. Luckily, again, the brain's going to be around for the most part for most people. We just need to fix the body up, and obviously the brain will follow. The brain will benefit from these interventions, because generally what's good for the body is good for the brain.
So I would imagine you're familiar with the British system of trying to quantify life, and you know, because my understanding is they have a very nationalized healthcare system. The government pays for healthcare, and they have a scheme. They call it a scheme, you know, for determining who gets the rare hip replacement, or you know, who gets the rare procedure. So, are you familiar with that? And you know, are you concerned about that, or do you think that that's more or less an equitable system of allocating who gets longevity treatments?
Well, I just want to say that, yeah, David, I just want to say that my mother has 2 new hips. And she's in Canada, by the way. There is no rationing there. The only little issue is you do have to wait for your turn, but you will get it. So like I said, it's unfortunate that they have this point system, I guess, as you alluded to. But again, there are other systems, but yeah, so good.
Yeah. I think that system is also related to not just aging treatments, but, you know, treatments in general, right? So it's more of an economic rationing system than anything, I think, based on other aspects. It may have some application.
So, you know, the insurance companies are, you know, probably 20, 30, 40 years ago didn't anticipate people would live so long, and, you know, didn't really concern themselves so much with the quality of life. And, you know, they are for-profit entities. How do you see insurance companies paying for longevity treatments? Paul?
Well, Prudential Insurance Company is actually, I have no connection with Prudential whatsoever. They're ahead of this curve. They had a billboard campaign in the San Francisco Bay Area, perhaps 7 years ago, where it basically said the first person to be 150 years old has already been born. Plan for a longer retirement. That was their catchphrase. They had other similar lines, the first person to do this, the first person to do that. But plan for a longer retirement was their thing. And I had a chance to speak to their general counsel at a conference 7, 8 years ago. They're very much aware of this. They have to change their actuarial models, but they have to change their actuarial models for lots of things. You probably noticed that in California, at least, insurance companies are pulling out of the business altogether because of the fire risk in certain neighborhoods. They're not static. They've made their plans, they've made their bets, and they're constantly revising them. And they're working on that. However, we will have to change our own plans as well. I gave a talk some years ago on beyond retirement. What happens when you live a lot longer and you're still expected to be paid on the public plan for another 50 or 70 years? We have to change our attitudes about what it means to retire and how we can contribute our own efforts and our own abilities to a longer lived humanity.
Yep.
Yes, Nuno?
Yeah. The government and insurance, let's look into their business models. So government charge you a fee, which they call taxes, and then they pay everybody's, expenses, common expenses. If you talk about Great Britain, right, or Canada, isn't it a better strategy to invest in rejuvenating and extending people's lives and save the money that you would spend on treating them when they're sick? So if governments look into the economics of this is the best business they could do. This is the best deal they could do, which is they save the money of treating people with cancer after 50, and they rejuvenate people who are over 50 to be, biologically younger. So governments should play a major role on investing on these companies because it's the best, economic decision for everybody. The same for, sorry?
No, I said not just that, but it also plays on the classic government strategy for anything is delay the problem, kick the can down the road. So what Nuno's trying to tell you or say, obviously, is let's postpone the problem for a later date, which I think everybody would benefit from. Clearly, right? Would you agree, Nuno?
Absolutely, 100%. And what happens is if you rejuvenate and you improve people's healthy life, they continue to be productive. So the problem you face with early retirement, again, is postponed. So you don't need to give them the early retirement because they're healthy and they want to continue. Paul, if you want to interrupt.
No, I don't want to interrupt. I'm just waiting for
you.
you.
Okay. And then the same for insurance. I mean, what's the business model for insurances, right? If you're over 50 or 60, they'll charge you way more because the risk is higher. If you're younger, they charge you less because the risk is smaller, but their margin is the same, right? So for them is the same if you're young or old, they just adapt the risk and increase the price. The problem is that if you're over 60 or 70 or 80, you cannot afford to pay those high prices. So if insurance companies invest on longevity, they are essentially improving the pool of customers they have. So they're increasing the number of members who can indeed pay the fees. So this is the best business for longevity, is the best thing that ever happened. Governments and insurance companies.
I totally want to emphasize what Nuno said. It increases the pool of people that you want to insure if you increase their longevity. So totally, the insurance companies it's a win-win situation. It's a win-win for the person. It's a win-win, and obviously for the health insurance companies if they're run by the state. Everybody wins. So there is no downside to living longer. Paul, did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, the one thing that we have to consider is this idea that you work for 40 years and then the rest of your life is paid for by somebody, the government or whatever. That works if you only live 60 years. So you're born, you start becoming a productive member of the workforce when you're, say, 18, then you put in 40 years, that puts you at 58 or 60, and then actuarially you're supposed to die around 65. That was how they set up the numbers. That doesn't work anymore. People are dying a lot later. And if we have successful longevity interventions, they're going to die a whole lot later.
Paul, I just want to add to what you said. Let us not forget Social Security came online before antibiotics existed.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the point, is that the whole system of retirement right now, the whole system of government supporting the elderly, defined elderly based on the actuarial lifespan at the time, which was, I think, 55 or 60. It really wasn't that much. I mean, many of us here are at that old or older, and, we're not old. We're certainly not planning to die anytime soon. So, you have to give up on the idea that when you're 60 or 68 or 65 or whatever the government says, you get a free ride for the rest of your life, because the rest of your life is going to be a lot longer than anybody calculated.
Well, just to play the devil's advocate, all this sounds great, but the reality today is a lot of people can't afford their health insurance, or struggling to pay their monthly premiums and deductibles and co-pays, and it gets very, very taxing on one's budget to have to pay a lot of medical bills. And
Well,
we're throwing
David,
the longevity on top of this. Well, we're throwing the longevity on top of this, is going to strain the budgets more.
David, let me just interject here. This is in the United States. Remember, in other countries such as Canada, everybody gets health insurance for free. So that is not a problem in Canada. It is here in the United States. So you might want to elaborate on that differential right there.
But still, it does, taxes the system to pay for a lot more years of life. They said there's a time you have to wait till you get your procedure. Will that time be elongated if there's more procedures offered to enhance longevity? Yeah, Brian?
So I want to make 3 points. One is in terms of looking forward and saying, okay, as we transition from the United States having roughly 80 years of life expectancy, or basically from the time you're born till the time you die, that point is about 50% of the people have died at that point of your age cohort, right? And then you have Japan up around 84. So our countries with more. And then within the United States, you have countries, states, or people like Asian women in New Jersey and Massachusetts who have life expectancy at 92. It was 94 before COVID, but so you have people who can live in a group up to 95, right? And insurance, everything still works. But then you also have countries, developed countries, in the mid 70s, right? So, and then that's also the case for Black people in America, right? So, in terms of like the difference of plus minus 10 years, plus minus 20 years, it does not strain the financial system. Everything still works at that point. Although the stresses that we face currently are that over 80% of the world's population in countries are below a replacement. So the birth rate has dropped. So as we said at the beginning, we had Social Security set up when there was a roughly 8-to-1, 10-to-1 working age population to retired population. And now we're down to 2-to-1. And in Japan, rapidly approaching, which is one of the more older countries, with people, median age heading about 50 and soon 55, that we're heading to a 1-to-1. And then that money scenario of I'm going to do something with this working age person, take 20% for tax, and give even half of that for supporting, is virtually nothing and insufficient to support a financial system for retirement. So the things are breaking not because of longevity, but because of insufficient babies and new generation and working age population. Longevity, where I revive the 30% of Japanese who are over 65, so they actually can work again, would actually save their financial system, right? Because they're too old. And I see people when I've gone to Japan many times where you have 70, 80-year-old people still selling things, still working the stores, even on road work crews, right? So basically, if you have the health and you don't have the money, then you have to work. And that goes to what was said before about rechanging our expectations that we may need to have second and third careers and continuing on to do things.
Okay, no, you raised your hand first. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. What are the reasons why somebody cannot pay for their own healthcare, for their own insurance, healthcare insurance? 2 reasons. First, they're not productive. So the problem is not related to healthcare, it's related to individual productivity. You have to produce and have a job or being an entrepreneur or produce wealth that allows you to cover for your own costs. So it's an educational problem. It's intertwined with the healthcare system, but it's something that governments need to reconsider. How can we help the population be productive? That's one of the parts of the problem. The second part is you can be productive, minimally productive, but if you're a smoker and you're not healthy, then your price of insurance increases. So there are two reasons how you can solve the problem. One, make people healthier. That contributes to minimize the problem because it lowers the cost of the healthcare insurance. So improve the health of the population, get them to be more healthy. And second, educate them, help them become productive to society. Those are the two things that have to be solved in order to solve the problem, in my opinion.
Okay, Paul?
One more point on equitability. Sorry, I was going to intervene one more time. One more point on the equitability and distributing the treatments. We just had a broad medical situation where billions of people got a new treatment to save their lives, which was the COVID vaccine. So in terms of equitability, when it is society beneficial and when you can do it at broad scale, which an aging treatment would be, then it's actually a net positive to society to pay for that treatment and to get it low cost enough, marginally low cost enough for everyone to get it. Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Yep. Well, with regard to equity, I've got a quote Ray Kurzweil, who said notably once, "The rich always get the best technology first, usually before it's perfected." Right now, interventions that are ridiculously expensive are going to the very wealthy, and some of them work, some of them don't, and who knows, some of them may be a disaster. That is not the problem with the average guy on the street. As these treatments, as these interventions become improved, they'll also be broadened in the way of access. Things that used to be terribly expensive are now easily affordable. But the other thing is that people assume that, that you're going to not be able to afford something. That doesn't affect the rich. And that's a gross oversimplification of what I'm talking about. But we all know people that don't have to work. They are self-funded retirees. Mark Zuckerberg, for example, doesn't have to work another day in his life. He does because he wants to. We can all name people we know who don't have to worry about paying their health insurance bills. The reason that most people can't afford this is because they don't live long enough. It takes a while to accumulate economic critical mass, point where you have enough money that you don't have to think about it anymore, or your money makes money for you. If everybody could live another 200 years, like in the vampire films or whatever, people would have a much better opportunity to accumulate the kind of wealth that would allow them to retire at whatever age. Right now, you just can't do it. Most people do not make enough money to accumulate that kind of economic ability over the ordinary lifespan. Who don't have to worry about paying their health insurance bills. The reason that most people can't afford this is because they don't live long enough. It takes a while to accumulate economic critical mass, point where you have enough money that you don't have to think about it anymore, or your money makes money for you. If everybody could live another 200 years, like in the vampire films or whatever, people would have a much better opportunity to accumulate the kind of wealth that would allow them to retire at whatever age. Right now, you just can't do it. Most people do not make enough money to accumulate that kind of economic ability over the ordinary lifespan.
Yeah, another thing that I think, again, a lot of people kind of denigrate living longer and, overpopulation, all the downsides of a more elderly population. But I think, as Paul and the other, and Brian have mentioned, I think there's a whole lot more upsides than downsides. One of them, obviously, is just you'll have more wiser people on the planet, right? The problem with humanity is that you always have these newborns coming online. The 20-year-olds will always be as unwise as 20-year-olds have always been, right? I mean, a 20-year-old has always had limitations as far as their wisdom and experience. But as you grow older, you gain wisdom and experience, which is obviously one of the very few upsides of growing older, right now at least. But can you imagine a society where you have people living, very long? Like, can you imagine the wisdom that they'll acquire? And, that would be a net positive for society. And one last thing, just regarding the upside, is if you're going to live a really long time, you might take better care of the planet, because if you're going to be around for some of these, these scenarios that some of the climate scientists are talking about, well, you might want to be a little more careful about, what you do and how you do it, because you're going to be around for some of the consequences that you instigate.
Okay, so maybe let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the technology, some of the actual science that's taking place in longevity. I guess first question along that line, are there solutions available to people that are already of advanced age? So if one is in their 70s or 80s, are there things that individual can do to further enhance longevity, or is most of the research directed towards providing this their research to younger people? So anyway, that's the question. Nuno? Go ahead.
I can start for sure. So one of the most promising, and most promising research being developed by, for example, Alto's lab, epigenetic rejuvenation. It's rejuvenating people, so it's biologically making people younger. And what this means is that regardless your age, you should invest on being as healthy as you can, because once this technology is perfected, we've seen amazing rejuvenation in mice and other species. So there's a lot of hope for people at any age, actually.
So without getting too deep into the science, Nuno, can you expand a little bit about how Aptos, you mentioned, how they rejuvenate people? Is that at cellular level, or how does that take place?
Sure. So just think about it. Your genes when you're 20 or you're 90 are exactly the same. What's different is what part of your genome is being expressed, is being read. Okay, it's called epigenetics. It's a different part of the genome that reads your genome and translates that into protein. So at the cellular level,
let me just give a very simple example. So in other words, we're all born with a piano. Okay, just the problem is the music changes. The keys are there for everybody, right? I mean, if you can imagine a key as a gene, right? Right. So what happens as we grow older, the music changes. So the keys that you press become different. I hope was that a good analogy, Nuno?
Beautiful, love it. It's the perfect analogy. So the gene is the keyboard of your piano, and then the notes you're playing is your epigenome. And when you get older, your genome is the same, but different parts of the genome are being expressed. And if we change that, you can indeed rejuvenate people to, essentially any age once we perfect that technology.
So is this a product that's on the market today that one can use? And if so, what kind of price is it offered at?
No, it's research level at this point. We've seen amazing results in the lab, in several different university labs around the world. It's not a commercially viable product, but the potential is very clear. But I can tell you that it's easy to see how this works, because if you think about it, when you have a kid, he's age 0, right? So you're 40 and you're a father and your kid is just born and his age is 0. So your reproductive cells don't have a problem of aging as the other cells in your body, right? So when there's a new baby being formed, the age of a newborn comes to 0. That's due to 4 epigenetic factors, 4 genes, which are known as the Yamanaka factors. And once stimulated, they essentially bring the cell age down to 0.
Again, I just want to jump in here. So regardless of how old the parent is, right, the child is always 0, as Nuno said. So if your father was 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, that child will always be reset to 0.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I want to mention that there's those people who are trying to compete and reduce biological age. So they have some level of biomarker attempt to say what is their physical age. So those are not fully accepted yet, but they have some papers where they say that those are. So it's a question of your evidence, if you're 70, 80, looking at that, is not conclusive. But then you have to decide, is this good enough for me to try this treatment? And one also, treatments may not have the same result. Just like I take some medicine, it works for some people and not others. Even FDA approved medicine, I can take this pill out, it doesn't work for me, right? But it works for other people, so that it got approved. And it does also that phase 1 clinical trial showing that it doesn't do harm per se, but the effectiveness can vary. So someone will have to say, okay, I'm getting some information that is working, reducing biological age for some people, and this biological age marker stuff has some evidence, maybe not conclusive, and I can look at trying it. So then you'll have to, it's a little bit of trial and error, and there are groups who get together, RADFest, radical aging groups, where several thousand people are all, motivated and highly aggressively trying the different treatments. So it's something where, in terms of what you can do now, some things have evidence that could suggest that they do work, but that it's not as conclusive. And generally the ones that are classed as kind of working are calorie restriction mimetics, possibly senescent cells, removing bad cells from the body. So those are kind of the class of stuff, metformin, rapamycin, those kinds of things that are suggesting that they have some broadly based effectiveness. But again, you have to kind of like jump the gun. But from my point of view, I'm 59 now. As I get older and I know the actuarial tables, where it's like, okay, it's 1% chance I die now, 2% each year in the year, up to 5%, 10%. I may say, okay, now my risk has gone up, and I would say I need to be more aggressively, more willing to try something that can reverse it. And then of course, there's always eating right, reducing your weight, exercise, etc., that we know is generally promoted with health.
Yeah, let me just segue off of what Brian just said. By the way, Brian, you mentioned caloric restriction. So it's been known since the 1930s. In fact, I believe the first experiment on caloric restriction was carried out in 1936. That method, and it was carried out on mice, by the way, and it found that if you caloric restrict mice, it will increase their lifespan about between 20 and 30%, which is pretty significant. If you apply that to a human, that's about like 20 years longer than normal. And so the fact that we could do that has been known for a very long time, which obviously kind of started the whole quest to extend life because of that experiment, right? So the fact that we know now that aging is flexible and you can change it, that's really kind of got the whole discipline going back in the day. But as far as what you can do right now, pretty much what I tell everybody is just exercise, eat healthy, think positively. Those are pretty much the recommendations right now, although there are many researchers looking at obviously a more interventive solution. Paul?
Yeah, there are a number of clinics coming up right now. One by my friend Ronald Primus comes to mind out of New York. Dedicated researchers, sophisticated physicians who are offering people treatments. Brian mentioned rapamycin and metformin, for example. Rapamycin isn't too difficult to get. It's used in immunotherapy treatments and cancer treatments. And metformin has been used for a long time to bring down blood sugar and diabetes. Many people I know, myself included, are taking metformin off-label, so to speak, not because we're diabetic, but because it has a probable effect on extending human life. Now, I'm a careful lawyer. I'm not going to advocate any particular treatment and, consult your physician. But those physicians are out there, and there are a number of clinics. There's a good one in Switzerland, I believe, right now that Joanna Benz is running. There are an increasing number of people who are happy to help you with your desire to take advantage of the most promising cutting-edge treatments for longevity. and it's not hard to find them.
One other thing that I forgot to mention was, of course, don't do the things that we obviously know are negative. The smoking, taking, bad drugs. There's a bunch of stuff where you could kill yourself tomorrow, right? So, don't do those things.
So
Oh, you're absolutely right about that. And that's always a problem. If I said, fentanyl is a great thing, it'll help you to live a long time, just don't do too much. Wouldn't
yeah,
work.
I think we got that. Let me just ask about the FDA's approval process. So it seems like a lot of the research is still at the clinical stage, maybe animal testing stage and so on. But to actually get it in the FDA's regulatory review process, is the system set up at the FDA? Are they prepared to entertain these applications, these NDAs? It seems like it's going to be very difficult because you would guess you have to take a placebo group and monitor the placebo group versus the treated group for 20 or 30 or 40 years to see, how the drugs are helping versus the placebo group. And we said earlier that, quality of life is what one thinks it is. So how can a regulator approve drugs under those conditions?
Well, we have something called biomarkers, which allows you to measure the efficacy of drugs without having to wait 30 or 40 years. When I first got involved in this field 18 years ago, that wasn't possible, and that was a valid concern. You're going to wait 80 years to see if somebody lives longer than the actuarial tables say he should, and we can't do that. But with biomarkers, increasingly, we're able to measure near-term effects of treatments that we can then extrapolate. If you're this healthy when you're X number of years biologically, or chronologically rather, then how many years are you biologically? And biological age is becoming an increasingly important factor in this. As far as the FDA, they are interested, but they're careful. And yeah, they're working on it. It's not easy for any drug to get approved at the FDA. And again, longevity drugs go through the same process as any other.
Yeah, David, it's not going to take that long. In fact, if there was such a drug or procedure, whatever you want to call it, whatever the solution is going to be, what's going to end up happening is whoever is taking it is actually going to get better. So that could be relatively easily quantized by just doing treadmill or doing cardiovascular exams and basically just doing how well they perform under different circumstances. So those are pretty much those take place in a doctor's office in many cases. So those can be pretty easily quantized. So no, it's not going to take that long. In fact, if there was such an intervention, you could probably see the results within like maybe 2 or 3 years. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so there is, I think in 2017, a few years ago, there's the TAME project targeting aging for metformin, I think is what it was. And basically, they did have a definition, an FDA accepted definition of aging, which then goes towards if you're targeting that, then you can actually say I'm directly going for that. And the FDA is basically recognizing that aging is a thing. The definitions around what that treatment is, in the protocol of that TAME project is not necessarily that simple. It's a fairly lengthy thing, so I can't here's the 5 things. But basically, they have a scientifically rigorous definition of what we are targeting as aging. That will probably evolve and then maybe different in other places, but there is movement on the FDA towards a definition of aging as a disease, as a targeted thing to be treated.
And I just want to also say that the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, actually has a subsection called the National Institutes on Aging. Okay, so this is very much in the sights of the government. They're very aware of what's going on when it comes to aging. So yeah, if there were a procedure or a drug or intervention that was efficacious, it would definitely be approved by the government and go into use. That is not a problem. Nuno, did you want to say something? Sorry.
Yeah. So just to be clear, I think Nuno was talking to us about Aptos. If Aptos was prepared to submit its NDA to the FDA would not have to do anything different or create any new process. to evaluate the drug. The existing processes are suitable to accommodate that application. Is that a fair statement?
I would say so. Altos is particularly well funded and is probably better able to get something past the FDA than a lot of companies. But effectively, the process is the process. That is either good or bad, depending on how you see it. A lot of people will argue that the FDA is perhaps too careful and that it takes too long to approve a new drug. But they're certainly working on it.
Are the longevity drug applications subject to right to try, I think it's called, administration? If there is no alternative, you have a right to try a drug that hasn't been approved.
As I understand the right to try, it applies to people who are ill and likely to die. And once you got nothing to lose, as they say, there is now a willingness to let you try anything, no matter how unusual, because you really got, as you say, no alternatives. You're going to be dead in 6 months. However, dying of aging is not yet understood to be something that requires an intervention. Now, that being said, there are a lot of biohackers out there, a hell of a lot of biohackers out there. And between legitimate channels and legitimate practitioners and others and the dark web and whatever, if you want to try something out on yourself, there's not much the government can do about it.
So what are some other interesting technologies that are research now? What else excites you in longevity? We'll hear from a couple of interesting companies soon, but what do you see happening, Brian?
There's some interesting work with compound treatments where Aubrey de Grey's Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation did a study with 1,000 mice where they took 4 treatments and then systematically, there was rapamycin, some telomeres, 2 other things that they combined, and the combination treatments performed better than just rapamycin. Rapamycin, boosted the mice, longevity by 30%, and then the male mice, got up to like 65% extension from the combination treatment. George Church and his group is trying to use combination treatments with a gene therapy. So again, combining multiple things to have multiple targets is something that is very interesting. And then there are a track by Carl Flager, about 180 companies working on various forms of anti-aging treatment with a broad range of, as you already discussed previous session, stem cells. There's some mitochondrial treatments that I think could be interesting. Mitochondria actually can, the energy battery of cells actually can be transferred between cells. So they've been finding that naturally occurs in a transfer. So then the possibility exists where you could harvest fresh young mitochondria, or even grow them and then get that into cells, which is interesting. So there's I think several areas. I think the most interesting for getting to a ChatGPT moment for longevity, where if you could double the life of mice, that could have the broadened acceptance within the academic scientific community, which would then translate over to the public in general. I think that could be something that could be on the table within 6 years, where
Brian,
you combine much treatment.
Did you also want to mention the Methuselah Prize, which is something that Aubrey, I believe, set up?
Right. I think the treatments I mentioned that they're talking about it are for older or late middle-aged mice. So then it's like you're trying to double or triple the remaining lifespan of the mouse to say, okay, it was going to live another year, we get to 2 years, which is basically what the Aubrey's Longevity Escape Velocity trying to do. It's like, I start with a 2-year-old mouse that's going to die at 3 normally. I'm trying to double it up to 2 years to prove that. So they have a prize related to it. And I think the combination treatments could get there in a relatively short order. Yeah.
There is also a Longevity X Prize right now. I think it's a $101 million prize put together by the X Prize Foundation and something called Evolution, which is out of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has barrels of money to devote to this cause, quite literally. And that is an attractive possibility, but it's not going to happen for a few years. Another treatment that I find promising is senolytic treatment, which basically eliminates a lot of we call zombie cells, garbage that accumulates. The best I can explain in an analogy is if you were working on an old-fashioned typewriter and you put in a page and you tap away and you do your thing, you rip the page out of the thing and you look at it, say, this is garbage, you ball it up and you throw it in a corner of your small office. It won't do much. But if you do that 20,000 times, your office will be so full of balls of paper that you won't be able to function. And the problem with senolytic cells is that they do not get eliminated by the body. They're zombies, basically. They sit around potentially forever, gumming up the works and making it difficult for you to operate. So there is research going on right now, including one of the companies that you showed in your list earlier, Ocean, which I do have an interest in, to get rid of senolytic cells and make life generally cleaner.
Yeah, so there are a lot of incentives out there for these companies, and I personally think the most attractive incentive is the people doing the work themselves. They just want to live longer. So I think that's probably more of an incentive than $100 million from the Saudis. But that is out there, like Paul said. So there's a lot of incentives, but I think the biggest one is just living longer as a researcher. Nuno, did you want to say something?
Sure. No, I was just going to summarize from the cellular level up to the behavior level. So at the cellular level or subcellular level, you can think about epigenetic treatments, as we spoke about Altos Labs, how to change our epigenetics. Also, obviously, genetic therapies. Dr. George Church is one of the pioneers using CRISPR and other technologies. Mitochondrial-based therapies. So if you replace the mitochondria in your cells, you increase and boost your energy. So those are probably the three I would highlight at the subcellular level. When you think about the cellular level, you think about stem cell-based therapies, like the ones that are typically being used today by injecting on joints and trying to improve your joint health, for example. You can think of senolytics, as Paul mentioned. So essentially ways to remove those zombie cells that stay and improve and are pro-inflammatory in your body. And then if you think about systemic level or your whole body, you can think about parabiosis, which is also being used currently and converting into some types of treatment. Hormone-based therapies. Steve is one of the pioneers in that at that level and can explain more. And obviously the behavior.
Sorry, did you want to just explain a little bit about the parabiosis? Because I don't think a lot of people know what that term means. So,
Well, essentially what we noticed when we crossed the circulatory system between old mice and young mice was that when you cross and you connect the blood system of both, the old mice becomes younger and the young mice becomes older from different metrics and different parameters.
Yeah.
So what this means is that in your blood, there's some cellular mechanisms that are rejuvenating your cells or getting your cells older and with more inflammation. So based on that, experiment, a lot of people are exploring, different research groups are exploring how we can, make this a therapy. And one of the things that we're searching for is what are the key factors in blood that could be, used to instead of making a blood replacement, how can we change some of the blood components in ways that can help us improve and rejuvenate the elderly systemically with some kind of blood-based therapy. So yes, I would say subcellular level, cellular level, systemic level, and then obviously behavior level, which is go to bed at the right time, fine-tune sleep, do exercise, eat properly. And one of the key behavior level interventions you can do, which is the most impactful in your life that people sometimes neglect, is how well connected you are to your community. So the more bonds you have with your family and friends is the best predictor at the behavior level of how long you will live, which is very interesting, which means, the more you want to live, the more your body is resilient, which is very interesting. And it's the most impactful one at the behavior level. So I would categorize in these 4 different levels.
Just really quickly on the last thing that Nuno mentioned, happiness is a huge thing. So the happier you are, the longer you tend to live. So I know that's very also neglected, as said, but mental health is actually a huge component in this right now. Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Not just happiness, but lack of stress. Stress kills a lot of people. And we really don't recognize that because stress is supposed to be good for you, you know. But one of the things that Nuno mentioned, parabiosis, is interesting. Essentially, you hook up an old mouse to a young mouse, and the young mouse, well, the old mouse gets younger, but the young mouse gets older. And I have presented parabiosis experiments to various places, micronations, which might be able to run these tests without a lot of red tape. And everybody is a little bit grossed out by it. Excuse me. It's the vampire factor, you know. You're going to take this blood substances from a young mouse and give it to an old mouse, and who cares about the young mouse? But there is a variant on this called plasmapheresis. And there's a guy named Dobry Kiprov out of Marin County, California, who is doing interesting plasmapheresis studies. You are looking at a guinea pig, test subject, lab rat, whatever. I participated in Dr. Kiprov's plasmapheresis studies. And although it involves basically washing your blood, it's not a difficult procedure, and it did show good results on my biomarkers. So, you know, there's all kinds of wonderful stuff going on right now.
Let me just ask maybe my last question. When pharmaceuticals get approved by the FDA and they're being sold, do you envision these solutions to be more mass-produced, broad-spectrum drugs that are suitable for a lot of people, or do you envision these products to be more personalized medicine for the individual based on their genetic code or the expression of their genes?
Yeah, I think it'll be much more personalized because, of course, when do you want to start the treatment? You want to start it at 20, 30, 40, 50. The actual phenotype of the person, in other words, the state that they're in, is going to dictate the type of treatment that they'll receive. Clearly, an 80-year-old is going to get something different than a 20-year-old will. And by the way, I just want to very briefly, because I think we only have a few minutes left, and I did mention if you're 80 or 90-year-old, but right now, if you are 80 or 90-year-old, you will not live long enough for a cure to become online, because it will take at least a decade or two for something like that to happen. So if you are in that age range, the only alternative right now is actually cryogenic suspension. So if you were to pass away within the next 5 or 10 years, the only way to kind of get into a lifeboat, as it were, would basically to have yourself frozen, which would give you that time to kind of allow the technology to catch up, where we can actually slow down the aging process. Paul?
Now, cryo is obviously the way to go if you are up for it, but it's Steve and I are working on the subject of cryopreservation right now, so I'm not telling him anything he doesn't already know. Almost nobody has signed up for cryopreservation, even though it appears to be the last best hope for somebody 70, 80 years old to be able to make it long enough for the scientific advances to be applied. It also requires you to die and then be frozen. You can't freeze the living person. So the trick is to catch somebody as quickly as possible after the moment of death, cool them down, infuse them with cryoprotectant solutions, and store them in liquid nitrogen until not the coming of Christ, but until the coming of the scientist who can help to restore them. If that's not acceptable to you, and it's not acceptable to many people, you can still take philosophical comfort in what I call being a member of the Moses generation. I'm not generally religious, but the story of Moses leading the Israelites through the desert is a good one here. Moses never made it to the promised land. God said, no, you're going to stay here on the mountainside, and your people can go to the promised land. And I'm nearly 70. I've had health problems. If I don't make it to the promised land, at least I know that I've done my bit to help everybody get there. And a lot of people, you know.
Granted. So let's give Brian and Nuno about 30 seconds each to impart their last pieces of wisdom to us.
Yeah, just to go on to that last point, is that the treatment, I think, if this broadly applicable and can do a lot of aging, I think it could become like the COVID vaccine treatments where, you know, billions get it and it's very cheap because the economics work out for that, and it can be very good. Also, I think it will be positive if we can make 90 the new 30, that basically the society, everything will be younger, we'll be productive, it will pay for itself. Where suddenly grandma can hop out and do work, it will be a positive thing and good for everyone. And also, we will have time to adjust. That we only get older 1 year at a time. If 40 million people, 50 million people don't die every year, even by 2100, it may only increase the population by 10%. So it's something that we can perfectly adapt to, like having 0.5 more children. It's a good thing.
Okay, great, thank you. Nuno will give you the last word.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I would like to end saying this is the best time of human history to be alive. And it is so because so many pioneers before us did amazing work. And the ones on this panel are doing fantastic work to improve, our quality of life and our longevity. And so many who are not here, amazing venture investors who are, taking this forward, amazing entrepreneurs, exploring the different areas. I just want to, take my hat off and thank every single one of the researchers, entrepreneurs, investors who are really making the world a better place by creating these technologies and solving aging for everybody.